Hey guys, Uncommon Ramen here, just with another reminder. If you like the content that I do, please hit that like and subscribe button so we can hit those analytics. And also, if you want to see the content as it happens, hit the bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload a new video. And as always, if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R. I do all of this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this to you more often. Alright, today we're going to do another deck tech. I was going through all my my custom-made commander decks, and I realized that I have built for 7 of the wedges, and I hadn't built for Sultai, Esper, or Bant. And so I felt like it was time to correct that situation. The problem I had for building with Sultai is that I won't say all of them, but a large portion of the best commanders, if you will, from Sultai were also extremely boring. Muldrotha, Tasigur, Tatsunari, just to name a few, just really boring. There wasn't much there that I really enjoyed mechanic-wise. The getting the gears moving in those decks didn't seem like fun. And then I came across Zexara the Exemplary, and I was really intrigued on this because not only can we do kind of a Hydra tribal deck here, since a lot of the Hydras have X in their cost, but we get this fun little X spell type thing, not on the same level as Hinata, but I still find it to be interesting and fun. So we're going to take a look at all this. Keep in mind that this was straight out of my collection. I did not buy any new cards for this, so things like Torment of Hailfire, Exsanguinate, they're not in this deck, and there's quite a few other cards that really I would suggest putting in here, but I didn't have them in my collection, so I just went with what I had. So starting with Zexara the Exemplary, this is 1 black, green, blue, Death Touch 2/3. You can tap it to add 2 mana of any one color, and whenever you cast a spell with X in its mana cost, create a 0/0 green Hydra with X +1/+1 counters on it. So every time you're casting an X spell, you're also getting a big ol' Hydra token on the table, and that is really, really how we build this deck. All right, so now we're going to go into the creatures. Being that it is set up like tribal, there was quite a few creatures in here. Starting with Capricopian. This is X and a green for a 0/0. Capricopian enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. You can tap 2 to put a +1/+1 counter on Capricopian. Then you may reselect which player Capricopian is attacking. Only the player Capricopian is attacking may activate this ability, and only during the declare attacker's step. So it's really interesting because in a 4-player game, you have 3 opponents, and your opponents can kind of pass Capricopian, pass the buck of Capricopian around to each other, while also increasing it in size. So if your opponent doesn't like the fact that they're the one who's getting attacked by Capricopian, they just pay the 2, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and select a new opponent for it, which I thought was such a cool idea. So Capricopian. Next up, we have Gadwick the Wisen. This is X and 3 blue. When Gadwick the Wisen enters the battlefield, draw X cards. Whenever you cast a blue spell, tap target permanent opponent controls. This is a great way to tap down something that might be blocking, that might be a threat while it's blocking. It's also a great, it doesn't have flash, so I guess you can't really do it in response to something. But when it comes into play, you get to draw X cards, and that's going to be really a big theme in this deck. Next, we have Genesis Hydra, 3 and 2 green, 0/0. When when you cast Genesis Hydra, reveal the top X cards of your library. You may put a non-land permanent with a converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield, then shuffle the rest into your library. And then Genesis Hydra enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. So again, this is just a really fantastic way to cheat something into play while still getting a huge body. There aren't only X spells in here, so you still can take advantage of that whole thing. I can't remember if I guess we'll find out. Next up, we have Grack, Skyclive, Ravager. This is 3, so 1 in black and a green. For a 0/0, Grack enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it, and whenever another creature you control dies, if it had a +1/+1 counter on it, put a +1/+1 counter on Grack. And then whenever Grack dies, you create an XX black-green Hydra creature token, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Grack. So Grack replaces itself when it dies. It gets bigger when your stuff dies, and since we're talking about big, beefy creatures coming out onto the battlefield, you're guaranteed going to see a lot of kill spells coming your way. So it's really going to be helpful with Grack, helping him get bigger so that when he dies eventually, you also just replace him straight out. Next up, we have Gyre Sage. This is 1 in a green. 1/2 evolve, so whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if that creature has greater power and toughness, put a +1/+1 counter on Gyre Sage, and then you can tap Gyre Sage for a green mana for each +1/+1 counter on Gyre Sage. So again, we're lending to the idea that we're going to be putting down really big creatures that are obviously bigger than Gyre Sage, growing Gyre Sage, and also growing her ability to give us green mana. This is a big mana deck, so it stands to reason we're going to do something like that. Plus, there's multiple different ways to add +1/+1 counters to her outside of just the evolve ability. Next, we have Herald of the Secret Streams. It's 3 in a blue for 2/3 creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them can't be blocked. So, again, this is taking advantage of the fact that pretty much everything in this deck is going to have a +1/+1 counter on it, especially the bigger stuff. So now they can't be blocked, and that is just phenomenal. Next up, we have Hero's Bane, 3 and 2 green for a 0/0. Hero's Bane enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. For 2 and 2 green, you can put X +1/+1 counters on Hero's Bane, where X is its power, so you just double it each time you pay the cost, and it just gets out of hand and becomes a target very quickly. Next up, we have Hungering Hydra. This is X and a green for a 0/0. Hungering Hydra enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. Hungering Hydra can't be blocked by more than one creature, and whenever Hungering Hydra is dealt damage, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. This guy is very, very, very difficult to kill. If you are going to kill it, you need to block it with something that has greater power, equal power, or greater power than it. Otherwise, it's just going to receive a whole bunch of +1/+1 counters and stay alive. It can only be blocked by one creature, which makes it even harder for you to really just block down and kill it. So this creature is a force to reckon with. Next up, we have Hydra Broodmaster. This is 4 and 2 green, double X green Monstrosity X. So it gets X +1/+1 counters on it, and when Hydra Broodmaster becomes monstrous, put XX green Hydra creature tokens onto the battlefield. She's a 7/7. So the beauty of this is that not only does it get massive on its own, but when it does get massive, it creates an army of massive Hydras as well. Super, super good. Next up, we have Ilfit Harvester. This is 4 and a blue for a 4/4 horror. It has Adventure Plant Tadpoles, X and 2 blue, sorcery. You can tap X creatures. They don't untap during their controller's next untap steps. And then for its creature side, it has Ceramorphosis. When Illithid Harvester enters the battlefield, turn any number of target tapped non-token creatures face down. They are 2/2 horror creatures. This has a double mean effect here. The first one is the plant tadpoles tapping down and keeping your opponents from being able to untap during their next untap step, which is great for leaving them wide open to swing in for some serious damage. But if you can't manage to close out the game right at that point, you can then cast on your next turn the Illithid Harvester and turn all of their tapped creatures into 2/2 base power 2/2, basically bears at this point. And that could potentially close out the game, if anything else. So super good, and a great way to deal with a whole bunch of really bad threats. Next, we have Iron Scale Hydra, 3 and 2 green for a 5/5. If a creature would deal damage to Iron Scale Hydra, prevent that damage and put a +1/+1 counter on Iron Scale Hydra. This guy is just going to continuously get big unless you burn it with a spell and not creature damage. Next, we have Mana Gorger Hydra. This is 2 and a green for a 1/1 trample. Whenever a player casts a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Mana Gorger Hydra. If you have ever seen Taurian Mauler, this is along the same lines as Taurian Mauler, except this one has Trample. Taurian Mauler just gets massively out of control very, very quickly, and this will as well for the same reasons. Nessian Wild's Ravager up next for 4 and 2 green, a 6/6. It has Tribute 6, so as this enters the battlefield, an opponent of my choice may place 6 +1/+1 counters on it. When it enters the battlefield, if tribute wasn't paid, you may have Nessian Wild's Ravager fight another target creature. So this is super cool because if it doesn't get tribute paid, you're just going to outright fight something and kill it. But if the tribute does get paid, then it just comes in as a 12/12, and it's just a super good card. Next up, we have Neverwinter Hydra. This is double X and 2 green for a 0/0. As Neverwinter Hydra enters the battlefield, roll XD6. It enters with a number of +1/+1 counters on it equal to the total of those results. It has Trample and it has Ward 4. So this guy is very difficult to get rid of, and it has Trample and it can get very massive. Next up, we have Nyx Bloom Ancient. This is 4 and 3 green, Trample 5/5. If you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much of that mana instead. So again, we're going for a big mana theme here. We want to cast these X spells for as much of a big boom as we can possibly do, and Nyx Bloom Ancient is just an absolute must-have in this kind of a deck. Next, we have Auron Reef Hydra. 4 and 2 green for a 5/5 Trample landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Auron Reef Hydra. If that land was a forest, put 2 +1/+1 counters on Auron Reef Hydra instead. Next we have Polukranos Unchained. 2, a black and a green for a 0/0. Enters the battlefield with 6 +1/+1 counters on it, and it escapes with 12 +1/+1 counters on it. If damage would be dealt to Polukranos, while it has a +1/+1 counter on it, prevent that damage and remove that many +1/+1 counters from it. For 1, a black and a green, you can have Polukranos fight another creature, and it escapes for 4, a black and a green, and exile 6 other cards from your graveyard. So Polukranos is a great continuous threat that has a built-in fight mechanic and is just a nonsense creature. Next up, we have Rampant Rejuvenator. This is 3 and a green for a 0/0. Rampant Rejuvenator enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and when Rampant Rejuvenator dies, search your library for up to X basic lands where X is Rampant Rejuvenator's power, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. So this is super cool because if it dies, it ramps untapped, so you don't have to worry about them coming into play tapped, and it also counts as a Hydra, so it just kind of goes with the theme. Next up, we have Stonecoil Serpent. This guy is X for a 0/0. Reach, Trample, Protection from Multicolored. Stonecoil Serpent enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. This is just a all-around beater. This was beater even during Standard, so it's just, you have to have it. It's super good. Next up, we have Stump Squall Hydra. This is X and 3 green. When Stump Squall Hydra enters the battlefield, distribute X +1/+1 counters among it and any number of commanders. So your commander doesn't have a way of getting bigger. It's the one Hydra in here that kind of doesn't have a way to add more +1/+1 counters on it. Well, any +1/+1 counters for that matter. So Stump Squall Hydra can help do just that. Next up, we have Vastwood Hydra. X and 2 green. Vastwood Hydra enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. When Vastwood Hydra dies, you may distribute a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the number of +1/+1 counters on Vastwood Hydra among any number of creatures you control. It is a 0/0. This is one of the ways that you can get more +1/+1 counters on Gyre Sage to make her really big and also really valuable. Next up, we have Voracious Hydra. This is X and 2 green for a 0/1 Trample. Voracious Hydra enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and when it enters the battlefield, you get to choose one. Either double the +1/+1 counters on it, or have it fight another creature you don't control. So this is really versatile because we can either make it a really big beater, or if we have a problem creature on the table that we can destroy, we can actually have it fight and just get that done and over with. And since we're playing big mana, we don't necessarily need to double down on these, although doubling down would make it really, really mean. Lastly, we have Vorel of the Hulklade. This is only in here because I did not have the black and green creature that says whenever a +1/+1 counter is being put out, put twice as many +1/+1 counters out instead. I can't remember the exact name of that card, but there is a black-green creature that you should probably use instead of this one that just outright passively doubles the amount of +1/+1 counters that are being put out. But since I don't have that, we have Varel of the Hulkblade. This is 1 a green and a blue. For a 1/4, you can tap a green and blue and Varel and double the number of each kind of counter on target artifact, creature, or land. So I like this because we get to double down the counters on creatures, but we also get to double down the counters on artifacts as well. And we have the Astral Cornucopia in here, so it helps to kind of make the Astral Cornucopia get out of hand very quickly. All right, next up we're going to take a look at instants. I believe there were 10 instants in here. We start with our Diviner's Portent. This is X and 3 blue. You get to roll a d20 and add the number of cards in your hand. On a 1 to 14, you draw X cards, and on a 15 plus, you get to scry X, then draw X. So we're going to try and basically stack our hand to make it as efficient as possible. I think it's a fantastic card. There are better things out there. I put this in here in lieu of the fact that I didn't have a Blue Sun Zenith. I think Blue Sun Zenith is pretty much outright better because Blue Sun Zenith shuffles itself back in so you can reuse it if needed. Next up we have Drown in Dreams, X, 2 and a blue. Sorry about that, guys. You get to choose one, but if you control your commander, when you cast the spell, you actually get to choose both. Target player draws X cards, and target player mills twice X cards, so it's a good way to mill out somebody who has a mean deck and that you need them to not have as many options, and it's a great way for you to draw cards, or if you want, you can actually draw somebody out completely. Next up, we have Erebos' Intervention. This is X and a black. Choose one. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, and you gain X life, or exile twice X cards from graveyard. So it's got graveyard hate if you're going up against somebody who really likes graveyard manipulation, and it has a really great way to eliminate a creature on the table and at the same time gain you life. This -X/-X will hit creatures with indestructible and kill them as well, so it's just a really versatile spell. Next we have Even the Score. This guy is X and 3 blue. This spell costs 3 blue less if cast, less to cast if an opponent has drawn 4 or more cards this turn, and then you get to draw X cards. The beauty of this is if somebody's playing Rhystic Study or Mystic Remora or, any number of cards that allow you to draw more cards than you would normally draw during your turn, it wouldn't be unusual for them to draw 4 or more cards during their turn when you cast this, so it's just a really great way to get a whole bunch of cards in your hand without actually paying the 3 blue. At the same time, you could still sacrifice and just pay the 3 blue and still draw extra cards. So either way, it's a really good card. Next up, we have Icy Blast. This is X and a blue. Tap X target creatures, my bad. Ferocious. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, those creatures do not untap during their controller's next untap steps. So this scenario that you don't have a creature with power 4 or greater is kind of slim, so you're probably going to get the Ferocious trigger every time, and you just get to tap out to X target creatures, which puts people in a position of being completely wide open, and when we're playing something with such huge creatures, it's not unusual that you could shut out a game with a spell like this. Next we have Logic Knot. This guy is X and 2 blue. It has Delve, so you can actually remove cards from your graveyard to pay for this. For each card you remove, you get to add 1 to it. And you counter target spell unless its controller pays X. So just a great way to take advantage of Zexara's ability to get a nice big Hydra, and at the same time counter something that might be very problematic for you. Next up, we have Pull from Tomorrow. This is X and 2 blue, draw X cards, and then discard a card. Just a really good way to draw cards again. It's got kind of a theme in here. Then we have Putrefy, 1 a green and a black. Destroy target artifact or creature. It can't be regenerated. This is just a great versatile kill spell. Next we have Syncopate, X and a blue. Counter target spell unless its controller pays X. If that spell was countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. It keeps recursion from happening by exiling the thing. It also keeps the spell from ever happening at all by countering it, so just a really good spell. Next up, we have Thassa's Intervention. I believe that's the last of the instance. Thassa's Intervention is X and 2 blue. Choose one. Look at the top X cards of your library. Put 2 of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Or you counter target spell unless its controller pays twice X. So another great way to counter spells, and it's really difficult to pay for. Next, we're going to look at sorceries. I believe there's 14 of these guys. Don't remember off the top of my head, but let me just pull these guys aside. Starting with Animists Awakening. This is X and a green. Reveal the top X cards of your library. Put all land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped. Then, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. If you have Spell Mastery, basically if there are 2 or more instant and or sorcery cards in your graveyard, you get to untap those lands. So this is really, really phenomenal because it's a fantastic ramp. It does not look for basic lands, and some of these non-basics will come into play tapped. This will force them to come into play untapped. It doesn't force them to come into play untapped. It just untaps them outright. So it's just a really great spell. Next up, we have Cultivate. 2 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Reveal those cards. Put 1 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, then shuffle your library. Just standard ramp. Next, we have Curse of Swine. X and 2 blue. Exile X target creatures. For each creature exiled this way, its controller creates a 2/2 green boar creature token. This is very similar to Ilfit, except that Ilfit Harvester is much more roundabout. You have to do it over 2 turns. Curse of Swine you can just do right away. Next up, we have Damnable Pack. This is X and 2 black. Target player draws X cards and loses X life. Again, this is a really good way to get cards into your hand. However, again, you can use it to kill your opponent by making them lose X life being their life total, or, draw them out to the point where they don't have any cards left in their library. So another optional win condition there. Next up, we have Death Cloud. This one is in here in place of Torment of Hailfire. I know that Torment of Hailfire does not hit you as the controller, and Death Cloud definitely does. But Death Cloud is one of those, you do it knowing that you can recover faster than your opponents. So if you find yourself in a position where that's not the case, I wouldn't cast it. But anyway, X and 3 black, each player loses X life, then discards X cards from his or her hand, then sacrifices X creatures, then sacrifices X lands. So this is going to be a salty card because your opponents don't want to sacrifice their lands. It's also going to be... Oops. Sorry about that. It's also going to be salty in the sense that it's going to make it hard for them to reset. But the problem is that it also hits you. Now, this is a great way if you want to shut out multiple opponents by just making them lose X life. So it could be a win condition if you know that when you cast this, you're just going to outright kill everybody at the table. Then you don't actually have to worry about the fact that you have to sacrifice your lands and creatures as well. So that is one thing you could hold it back for, which is more along the lines of what Torment of Hailfire is anyway. But anyway, that's what we got, Death Cloud. Next up, we have Farseek. 1 and a green. Search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain card. Put it onto the battlefield tap, then shuffle your library. Again, it doesn't look for basics, so that's really, really great in this deck. Next up, we have Finale of Revelation. This is X and 2 blue. Draw X cards. If X is 10 or more, instead shuffle your graveyard into your library, draw X cards, untap up to 5 lands, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Then you exile Finale of Revelation. There is no part about this that is bad. If you don't end up using it for 10 or more, you get to draw a whole bunch of cards. If you do, you get a whole bunch of other incredible benefits. There is nothing downside about that card, aside from the fact that it's sorcery. Next, we have Gaze of Granite. X, a black, and a green. Destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X or less. This is a last resort kind of board wipe. You don't want to do this unless you know you can recover faster again. Next, Kodama's Reach. 2 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Reveal those cards. Put 1 into play tapped and the other into your hand, then shuffle your library. Next, we have Mass Manipulation. Double X and 4 blue. Gain control of X target creatures and or planeswalkers. This is also meant to be a win condition. If you can cast this, and I'll explain more as we get into it. There is a way to get infinite mana here, and eventually there will be 2 ways. Mass Manipulation will take control of all of your opponent's board state and then swing into them and just delete them. And that is kind of the point of this card. It is meant to be a win condition, and we'll get there when we get there. Next up, we have Mind Spring. This is X and 2 blue, draw X cards. Pretty simple. We're just trying to draw cards. Then we have Profane Command. This is X and 2 black, choose 2. Target player loses X life. Return target creature card with converted mana cost X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Target creature gets -X until end of turn. Or up to X target creatures gain fear until end of turn. It's a very versatile command. You can use it to outright kill an opponent because you can make them lose X life. You can return something from your graveyard, although a large portion of this stuff is X, and well, I should say a large portion of this is 0/0, and returning it from the graveyard to the battlefield will just end up having it dead again. But if there is something like the Hulklade or Secret Streams, so on and so forth, in your graveyard, you can return that. Or you could just outright kill one of their creatures. Again, it's one of those -X, so it hits indestructible. It's just a really great card. And then the final part is the X creatures get fear. If your opponents are not playing black and they don't have very many artifact creatures, this could shut out the game as well. Next, we have Rampant Growth. 1 and a green, search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. And then finally, we have Villainous Wealth. Villainous Wealth is X, a blue, a black, and a green. Target opponent exiles the top X cards of his or her library. You may cast any number of non-land cards with converted mana cost X or less from among them without paying their mana cost. This, in this deck, can be really deadly. It can cripple an opponent outright, and utilizing their deck and their resources could also cripple the other opponents. So, just a beautiful card to have in here. Next, we're going to take a look at artifacts. Right. We have Arcane Signet. This is 2. You can tap it to add a mana of your commander's color identity to your mana pool. Next, we have Astral Cornucopia. This is triple X. Astral Cornucopia enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it. You can tap it to choose a color and add 1 mana of that color to your mana pool for each charge counter on Astral Cornucopia. So, again, Hulklade can make this better, but if you can manage to get big mana, this can be a really powerful mana rock for you. Next, we have Bootlegger Stash. 5 and a green. Lands you control have tapped to create a treasure token. This just plays really well off of Wilderness Reclamation, making it just really no point in not keeping your lands open and then tapping them at the end of your opponent to your right, their turn, to get a bunch of treasure tokens. Just a really good card. Next up, we have Elementalist Palette. This is 3 for a artifact. Whenever you cast a spell with X in its mana cost, put 2 charge counters on Elementalist Palette. You can tap Elementalist Palette to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, or you can tap it to add colorless for each charge counter on Elementalist Palette, and spend this mana only to cast, or only on costs that contain X. So this again is just lending to helping pay the big mana to get really, really efficient X cards. Next, we have Fractal Harness. This is X, 2 and a green. It's an equipment. When Fractal Harness enters the battlefield, create a 0/0 green-blue Fractal creature token. Put X +1/+1 counters on it, and attach Fractal Harness to it. Whenever equipped creature attacks, double the number of +1/+1 counters on it, and it equips for 2. So it's going to come out attached to a creature that's already going to be relatively big, and it's going to continuously double that creature's +1/+1 counters until it dies. But then, since we're playing a whole bunch of Hydras that have +1/+1 counters on it, we just move the equipment to one of those Hydras, and all of a sudden now that Hydra is going to get double the amount of +1/+1 counters every time it attacks? Yeah, every time it attacks. So just a really beautiful way to create threats very quickly. Next up, we have Horizon Stone. 5. If you would lose unspent mana, that mana becomes colorless instead. So this is a great way to store mana onto a card and use it whenever you want. So you can just outright tap into this and throw tons and tons and tons of colorless mana onto this card, and then spend it on an X card that is just outright oppressive. Next we have Simx Signet. This is 2 for an artifact. You pay 1 and tap it to add green and blue to your mana pool. We have Soul Ring next up, 1. You can tap it to add 2 colorless. Next up we have Swiftfoot Boots. This is 2. Equipped creature has hexproof and haste, and equip for 1. And finally we have the Ozolith. This is 1. Whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had any counters on it, put them onto the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all of those counters from Ozolith onto target creature. We're going to be putting a ton of +1/+1 counters on a ton of different creatures, so the Ozolith will be able to catch those and redistribute them as those creatures die. So you get to retain some sort of value, and it makes this a really big target card, but it really does help with a deck like this. Next up, we're going to take a look at enchantments, and we're going to see one of the enchantments that helps us go infinite. We have Freed from the Real. This is 2 and a blue. For 1 blue, you can tap enchanted creature, or you can tap, or you can untap enchanted creature. So what you do is you enchant Zaxara. Zaxara taps for 2 mana of any one color. So you tap for 2 blue, you use 1 blue to untap it, then you tap for 2 blue, you use 1 blue to untap it. Basically infinite blue mana. And with all these X spells in your deck, you can't get anything but value from that. There is supposed to be Pimin's Aura in here. I did not have one. I ended up having to buy it, and when I eventually do get it, I will put it in here, but I do suggest you put Pimin's Aura in here as well. Really anything that can help add that infinite mana really helps to bolster this deck. Next up, we have Gadwick's Uprising. This is 2 and a green enchantment. When Gadwick's Uprising enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you get to draw a card. Creatures you control have trample, and whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you get to draw a card. So we have a little bit of a draw card engine here. We give all our creatures trample, which they're going to be massive, so they're going to need that, and it replaces itself when you play it. Next up, we have Hardened Scales. This is 1 green. If 1 or more +1/+1 encounters would be put on a creature you control, that many +1/+1 encounters are put on it instead. So we're just going to keep on adding +1/+1 encounters. Next, we have Hydra's Growth. This is 2 and a green. Enchant Aura, enchant creature. When Hydra's Growth enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on enchanted creature, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, double the number of +1/+1 counters on enchanted creature. This is another way to get Gyre Sage a little bit bigger, but it also, just in general, works with any of these Hydras, doubling up on their +1/+1 counters and making them a really big threat. Next, we have Unnatural Growth. This is 1 and 4 green. At the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. With Gadwick's Uprising, this becomes a game ender. Next up, we have Wilderness Reclamation. This is 3 and a green. At the beginning of your end step, untap all lands you control. We are maximizing on the whole idea of either storing mana on the Horizon Stone or playing really, really big X spells. So the idea of having any mana left over is really low, which means that having things like the counter spells that we have with Thassa's Intervention and Logic Knot can be very difficult to play because you may end up having to just pass a turn. With Wilderness Reclamation, you straight up don't have to. You have a counterspell and you can just play it when you play it. Next up, last up, we have Zendikar Resurgent. This is 5 and 2 green. Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced, and then whenever you cast a creature spell, you get to draw a card. So it is a draw card engine, and it also doubles up your mana alongside with the Nyx Bloom Ancient. So we're going for that big mana strategy. Finally, we're going to take a look at Planeswalkers. We have 1 in here, and this is Steward of Elements. This is X, green, and a blue. For +2, you can scry 2. For 0, you can look at the top card of your library if it's a land card or a creature card with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of loyalty counters on Nissa Steward of Elements. You may put that card onto the battlefield, so you can cheat things into play. And then finally, for -6, you can untap up to 2 target lands you control. They become 5/5 elemental creatures with flying and haste until end of turn, and then they still count as lands. There's a couple reasons why I was in here. Obviously, because it's an X spell, so Zexara sees that and creates a nice big Hydra. But we also like that cheating effect. Cheating things into play is always great, despite the fact that a lot of the stuff in here is X and 0/0. We have the Scry 2 to help us scry into something that might be a better target for the 0. And then finally, that -6 isn't bad. To get in the final increments of damage, having 2 5/5 flyers is kind of hard to deal with. Okay, we're going to take a look at non-basic lands. Whoa, there's quite a few. All right. Starting with Bajuka Bog. This is kind of a obvious choice if you're running black. Enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you get to exile all cards from target player's graveyard, and you can tap it for black. Then we have Breeding Pool. Counts as a forest island. Taps for red or for green-blue, and enters the battlefield tapped unless you pay 2 life. We have Castle Garenbrig. This one enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest. You can tap it for a forest, or you can tap 2 and 2 green, tap it, and add 6 mana to your mana pool, 6 green mana to your mana pool that you can only spend to cast creature spells or activate abilities on creatures. So again, we're going big mana, so you can spend 4 to add 6 to throw into an X spell, or specifically an X spell Hydra. Then we have Command Tower. You can tap it to add 1 mana of your commander's color identity. Deathcap Glade. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Taps for green and black. Dreamroot Cascade. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands, and you can tap it for green and blue. Exotic Orchard. You can tap it to add a mana to your mana pool of a land your opponents control. And again, I say this every time I talk about Exotic Orchard or Felwar Stone, but if you're playing 3 colors, so you're playing against 3 other opponents, at least one of them is going to run a color that you're running. Next up, we have Hinterland Harbor. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest or an island. Taps for blue-green. Next, we have Llanowar Waste. I put Llanowar Waste in here because I didn't have any more the cemetery. What is it called? Something cemetery. The checkland that's like Hinterland Harbor. But anyway, Llanowar Wastes can tap for colorless, or you can tap it for green or black, but you take 1 damage if you do so. Next we have Misty Rainforest. You can tap it, pay 1 life, sacrifice this, search your library for a forest or island card, and put it onto the battlefield tapped. No, just put it onto the battlefield, my bad, not tapped. Next we have Opulent Palace. This is the tap land that adds green, black, and blue. We have Overgrown Tomb. Counts as Swamp or Forest, adds black or green, and enters the battlefield tapped unless you pay 2 life. We've got Rejuvenated Springs. Adds green, black, enters the battlefield tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. We have Rogue's Passage. You can tap it for colorless, or you can tap 4 and it to have target creature become unblockable until end of turn. Super good when you have big creatures like this. This could be the death of somebody. Next we have Shipwrecked Marsh. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Taps for blue-black. Next we have Simx Growth Chamber. Enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, return a land you control to your hand. And you can tap it to add green and blue. Next we have Sunken Hollow. Counts as an island and swamp. You can tap it to add blue or black, and it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Next we have Temple of the False Gods. You can tap it to add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool, but you can only activate that if you have 5 or more lands. And then finally we have Zagoth Triome. Counts as a swamp, forest, or island. Comes into play tapped, adds black, green, blue, and you can cycle it for 3 if you want. And then finally our basic lands. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 forests. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 islands, and 2 swamps. Alright guys, that is the Zexara, the Exemplary, X Spells Matter types deck. We're doing Hydra Tribal here, as well as any X spells that really synergize well with this. And that's it. If you have any comments or questions, leave those down below. Let's keep it positive. I will be removing anything negative because it's not necessary. And until next time, guys, peace.